of the year. What went into the decision to put Kenny in?
Just thought we needed a spark, man. We didn't do much in the first half, not enough offensively, and thought he could provide a spark for us.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Extra Point presented by Microsoft Surface. I'm Missi Matthews. A lot to unpack in the Steelers' third straight loss, dropping one to the Jets at Acrisure Stadium 24-20. Let's welcome in our panelists so we can get things started. Dale Lolley from Steelers.com and Steelers Nation Radio. Former Steelers quarterback and post-game host on WDVE, Charlie Batch. Hall of Famer and former Steelers linebacker Arthur Moats. And guys, we have a lot to talk about. As I said, a quarterback change, the defense not being able to get off the field at the end. So just generically about the entire day and how it unfolded. Dale, what was your biggest takeaway?
The Steelers really need their playmakers, particularly the offensive playmakers, to make plays regardless of who the quarterback is. You can't have balls tipping off of guys' hands and then turning into interceptions. You can't have drop passes. You can't have missed blocks and things of that nature. But you need your guys who are your playmakers, and they have just a ton of talent on that side of the ball. But potential for that stuff is not putting it on the field, and that's what they're not doing right now, is consistently putting it on display on the field.
Yeah, and Dale, I'm glad you brought up the consistency part. To me, that was kind of my takeaway from all three phases. Very inconsistent. At times, you see a flash where, yeah, they can move the ball offensively, they can run the ball offensively, but then you see flashes where it's not there. And then the same could be said about this defense. At times, it looks like it's about to be dominant or take over the game, create that havoc type situation for the opposing quarterbacks. But then on other times, you see quarterbacks having time to extend plays, the receivers running open, not being able to stop the run situationally. It's a lot of inconsistency as a whole when I look at all three phases of this team right now.
And there's a lot of blame to go around. And literally, there's not one specific position group, a unit that you can look and say, okay, you're the reason why we're not winning. And right now, when you see that and you hear the comments that are coming out of the locker room immediately after the game, they know there's holes that they have to fix. They're willing to take accountability to it. And at that point, hopefully get back to business as it relates to trying to turn this and right the ship right away.
Charlie, we heard from Coach Tomlin at the top of the show. He thought Kenny Pickett would provide a spark, and we did see that initially in the second half. In your opinion, what went into that decision to change quarterbacks?
Well, just going back and watching the film, it was a couple throws, 2 drives before the half ended. That really was a questionable decision on why Mr. Trubisky would make those particular throws. And then, you end it with the field goal at the end of it, but I think that decision was ultimately being made prior to halftime. So whether that was Matt Canada telling Mike Tomlin that, hey, a move needs to be made, or Mike feeling that he needed to now provide a boost, ultimately it caught everybody off guard. It just reminded me of 2019, if I'm not mistaken, whenever Mason Rudolph was starting against the Bengals, and then he inserted Duck Hodges and he led him to a touchdown drive coming off the bench. So he was hoping for that. You did get some of that, but ultimately when you let a 10-point lead like that, all of that is forgotten.
Dale,
what absolutely right.
Sorry, go ahead, Moats.
Oh, I was going to say, you're absolutely right. And when you're talking about Coach Tomlin's decision, you have to remember, it's less about the personal, who he thinks is a better player, Mitch versus Kenny, and more about him trying to get out of the stadium with a win. So in that context, if he feels that, hey, man, as a team, we're not responding the way that we need to, and maybe this guy can give us that type of spark, even if it's not a end-all, be-all, this is the final time we're going to see Mr. Trubisky's decision in that particular set right there. Coach Tomlin did feel like that was going to be the spark that was needed. And to an extent, it did help because we saw us be able to come back and get that 10-point lead. It was just unfortunate, like Charlie said right there, we weren't able to sustain it and finish the game in the manner that we all would have hoped that they would have.
Dale, what was the biggest difference between the offense in the first half and the second half besides the quarterback?
I thought that Kenny Pickett took some more shots down the field. I thought he took more chances. Now, they also ran a lot of shorter stuff for him. But he was giving the receivers down the field chances to win one-on-one, particularly George Pickens, and we saw Pickens do that. That's something that had been kind of beat over the head with a stick the first 3 weeks. Like, why isn't Trubisky taking these shots down the field? And he did take some shots, but not to the level that Kenny Pickett did when he came in. And also, he was throwing them a much more, those one-on-one situations. He was putting the ball where the receiver could make the play on it, as opposed to throwing just kind of a 50-50 ball in many of those situations.
For all of you guys, who would you start in Buffalo next Sunday?
Well, to me, I think you roll with Kenny Pickett. From personal experiences, man, being on teams where we've had quarterbacks be switched, not here specifically in Pittsburgh, but from my experiences, man, when you start going back and forth, you kind of lose that direction. And if they're a player, and I'm asking myself, well, coach, who do you believe in? And you don't have that type of clarity. Well, how can I, as a player, know that, hey, I should believe in this quarterback over this guy when the coaching staff as a whole doesn't? So I personally think you roll with Kenny and you see what this thing looks like, right, wrong, or indifferent. But I think that's the approach that I would take, just from, like I said, the experiences that I've had at this level when there have been those quarterback switches back and forth throughout the season.
And I agree with you on that. I think this, right there, when you make the move to Kenny Pickett, right there, everything else is out the window. So it's, to me, it makes sense to start Kenny at this point. But the bigger question for me is, what do you do with Mitch? Because right now, he doesn't feel like he should have been benched, number one, and he should still be playing. Number two, he's playing against Buffalo, a team he spent last year with. So you better believe he wants to now go up there and showcase what he's capable of doing. But ultimately, if you're Kenny, you don't want to look over your shoulder, because you saw what happened with Mitch. Mitch was playing, looking over his shoulder now that the move is made. To me, if you roll with Kenny, you actually have to move Mitch to number 3 and then make Mason Rudolph your backup at this point.
Dale, in terms of a whole preparation week for Kenny, it sounded like, listening to him after the game and even some of his skilled players in the locker room today, he didn't get a ton of reps, so maybe that will help moving forward as well for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the reasons why, I think there needs to be some immediate clarity there. You don't want this to be a situation where you have both guys taking first team reps and then make your decision based off of that. I don't think that serves anybody well in that situation. So I think that, to Arthur's point, especially the team, so you make a decision, you stick with it. I see both sides of this. I understand that this is a team that Mitch knows intimately that they play this week. It's going to be a very hostile environment in Buffalo, and maybe you don't want that to be where Kenny Pickett makes his first career start. But at the same time, you made that decision, on Sunday about, about 2:30 in the afternoon. For better or worse, I think you kind of have to live with it at this point.
Charlie,
you can't live in your fears either about, I was gonna say, you can't live in your fears either about who is on the schedule. We don't make personnel decisions based on, oh man, these next couple of games are going to be more tougher than not. We shouldn't put this young player out there. No, you're making those decisions because you think that this is going to help this team this year right now. So even in that vein, I definitely can understand for some of the people out there that might be a little bit nervous about Kenny going on the road in Buffalo. But like you just said, man, when you make that switch, you have to roll with it. And I just think that this becomes more so about Matt Canada and this offense putting together a game plan that will highlight some of the things that Kenny does well, but also protect him from some of that potential negativity that he's going to be exposed to up in Buffalo. And that's the part for me where I want to see from Matt Canada how he continues to progress, because we have seen some of the things improving with his play calling as well.
Charlie, I was going to ask in specifics to Kenny, his footwork, mechanics, decision-making as a quarterback. Give us the scouting report of what you saw. I know it was a small sample size.
Yeah, it was. And I think, just watching him going through his reads and dropping and delivering, I was impressed with that. But the biggest thing for me is the wit. And that wit happened when he threw that pass over the middle to Freiermuth. He got laid out and immediately got up and started jarring back and forth with the Jets defender. That right there lets me know he's not phased. He's ready to play, and now is the time to insert him. So that is a play right there that speaks confidence, not only to the coaching staff, but for every player who was watching that let him know, hey, I'm ready to play ball.
Oh, 100%. That was an NFL throw. That was a big-time throw and catch, taking the defender right in the face like that. And yeah, that is when you talk about winning the respect of your team, regardless of who you might think should have been starting at QB1. When you see plays like that, those are some of the things where you say, you know what, I don't care about that. It's hard to deny what you just saw right there. So 100%, Charlie, you're absolutely right with that.
Dale, if the Steelers do go with Kenny in Buffalo, Coach Tillman has yet to announce that decision publicly. The run game, that's something we've talked about so much through these first 4 weeks. What do we need to see from that?
Well, I thought that was really one of the things that kind of got away from them a little bit on Sunday. Najee Harris had 2 carries in the fourth quarter of that game, and one came on, I believe, that last possession of the fourth quarter, and they only ran a couple of plays there and scored a touchdown. Yeah, you have to get this guy going. They got him going. Stick with it a little bit. You're trying to grind some time, run some clock. I talked to James Daniels after the game, and he said, absolutely would have liked to have kept running the football there a little bit more. I understand you're trying to, get your young quarterback his feet under him and do those kind of things, but you can also do that by running the ball and running the ball effectively and putting him in some, second and third and short situations. And they were doing that with the running game throughout the course of this game.
All right, guys, we still have to talk about the Steelers defense and what happened at the end of the game when the Steelers had the lead. Don't go anywhere. You're watching The Extra Point, presented by Microsoft Surface.
Everything in tight. 3rd and goal. Pickett, second effort. He's in! Second effort got Pickett into the end zone for his first career touchdown. And the Steelers have forged ahead.
We have to work together on defense. If we hit home up front, we got to make sure we're good on the back end. And when the back end holds up and buys us extra time, we got to finish those plays. Not enough coordination through the entire defense.
Welcome back to The Extra Point, presented by Microsoft Surface. Arthur, I'm going to start with you on this one since we are talking Steelers defense. You heard defensive captain Cam Hayward there. What went wrong again in the fourth quarter? 2 touchdown drives the Jets were able to put together.
Yeah, Cam, man, he hit on a lot of it right there when he talked about rushing coverage working together. You see that, and we saw that a good amount of times yesterday, where at times where the rush was getting home, they weren't finishing the rush, and that was ultimately allowing this secondary to have to cover a lot longer, and we saw those receivers take advantage of that. Then we also saw, in contrast, times where it seemed like Zach Wilson had forever back there. Those elements definitely played a part later in the game in terms of why Zach Wilson and that offense were able to have those type of completions and just move the ball the way that they did. Now, when we're talking about some of the actual run game stuff, I do feel like part of that was going back to the big nickel defense that we saw yesterday. At times, it did work, but once again, when you have guys that are interior D linemen playing as D ends, sometimes the gap responsibility isn't always consistent, and that was some of those times that happened on that particular last drive when you're talking about how they were able to keep churning the clock and keep, just milking that time up until that last second field goal and things like that. A lot of it has been because of the different people that are out there with that big nickel defense. But once again, as we've said, when you don't have a TJ Watt, you have to play around with different personnel groupings. You have to do certain things to mitigate the loss of productivity from TJ. But at times, some of the cons are the detail, the little minutia that goes into a guy full-time being a DN versus a guy moonlighting as a DN. That's some of the disconnect that is taking place. And that's why we're feeling this feeling of, at times we look really good defensively, and then at other times we're kind of scratching our head like, how is this same unit getting beat the way that it is right now?
Charlie, in terms of Zach Wilson, his 2022 season debut maybe started a little rusty, but he definitely got more comfortable as the game went on.
He did, and you heard Mike Tomlin talk about it coming into the week. You really don't know who he is because he didn't play, and you didn't have the tendencies to kind of fall back on whether or not you can predict some of the things that he was going to do. To his credit, it started a little rough, but he was able to stand in that pocket and deliver the football. I love the route combinations that they were doing on the Jets. And that coaching staff was able to start predicting from a personnel perspective when they lined up what the defense of the Steelers were going to do. They exploited some of those receiver linebacker matchups, and that's not something that you want to have on the defensive side. But as soon as you see the matchup as a quarterback, you are going to that is your number one read and what you're looking at. And they were able to take advantage of some of those opportunities. But at the end of the day, they had opportunity to get off the field. They didn't do it, and that's what led to the frustration in the comments that you're hearing from Cam Hayward.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Charlie, because that's one thing that you see over and over again in the NFL, and people wonder, why these two teams didn't score the first 3 quarters, and why is this team suddenly going on these long drives in the fourth quarter? A lot of the times it's because the defense has shot all of its bullets. they've seen every personnel package. They know what's going to happen when they line up in a particular offensive package. They know what look they're going to get, and then they begin to exploit that look. And you look at it yesterday, the Steelers in the first 9 possessions the Jets had gave up 202 yards and 10 first downs. The last 2 was 146 total yards and 9 first downs on those final 2 possessions. And largely that was because why it happened. You look at some of the guys the Steelers were missing in that situation as well. Terrell Edmonds went out at before halftime. Minkah Fitzpatrick was in and out. Cam Hayward was banged up a little bit. So the Jets had started to figure some things out on who they were going to get in certain packages, and then began to exploit that.
Arthur, how do they clean things up knowing TJ Watt is not coming to the rescue in Buffalo on Sunday, and who knows how soon they'll see him after that?
Yeah, some of it is I think they have to focus more on the details. When you're talking about that accountability element of it, the minutia matters. When you're talking about alignments, pre-snap, that matters. Your disguises, that matters. And it matters even more so when you don't have TJ out there because your margin of error is so much smaller now. But at the same time, I also think that when you're talking about some of these players that are out there, they have to play better as well. They're in some of the positions to make plays. They're in some of the positions to be more in terms of being playmakers, but the consistency just has to get better. And part of that is a reaction to some of the injuries that were out there. No Akello Witherspoon. So what did that mean? That meant that Arthur Moats was going to have to play a lot more in obvious passing situations, whereas typically with Akello being out there, it would be Akello and Levi on the outside. Cam Sutton bumps into the slot. You weren't able to do some of those things later in the game. When you talk about going for 3 safety package, we were seeing at times where it would be Minkah Fitzpatrick, Terrell Edmonds, and Trey Norwood. Where you take Edmonds out of the lineup because he's hurt, now you're not able to be flexible in that regard either. So when we're talking about how can they get back to being dominant, I think it's twofold with that. But we also have to be realistic in the sense that with these injuries that they have at some of these positions, it is going to stretch them thin, and it is going to require some of these players to just have to play better than what we might be accustomed from them. But that is something that this team has to deal with right now until the TJ Watts and the TJ Watts and the Terrell Edmonds and the Akello Witherspoons get back out there.
And those are all valid points, Moats. And the one thing that can help this defense is drives from the offense to give this defense a rest. So it's imperative for these guys to now put together a 9-10 play drive to now give these guys a rest. So now when it comes to the fourth quarter, they're not gassed and they can go out and deliver those game-breaking plays.
And just
Absolutely.
to go over some of those defensive injuries, we know Terrell Edmonds left the game with a concussion. He's in the protocol. Cam Hayward dealt with an elbow injury, got some x-rays and MRIs at halftime, then with an ankle injury as well. Cam Sutton with a hamstring, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, his knees being looked at. And as you mentioned, didn't have Akello Witherspoon at all. So a lot of those guys on defense we're going to have to pay attention to throughout the week to see what their practice availability is. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. Appreciate your insight. We have a lot to talk about as the Steelers get ready for the Buffalo Bills. All right, that's going to do it for the Extra Point presented by Microsoft Surface. We'll see everybody next week.